On last week's show, a retired Scotland Yard detective gave me a fairly depressing take on the state of British policing. As you know, 2 centuries ago, Sir Robert Peel's Metropolitan Police invented policing in the modern world, and it is tragic to see his successors so comprehensively dishonour a great legacy. As we noted a week ago, only 1.4% of reported rape cases are prosecuted. In Wiltshire, it's 0.7%. And you might think that's to do with the particular difficulties of that specific crime, but in fact the great preponderance of crime now goes unsolved and indeed uninvestigated. I believe they've got a website you can report your crime on, and they check it every 3 or 4 months. The catchphrase of Her Majesty's most famous constabulary, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, is that the Mounties always get their man. But that's way too much like hard work, so in the UK the coppers would rather get you, because frankly that's a lot easier. So as we've seen this last year and a half in particular, if you make the mistake of lingering on a park bench too long during your government-regulated morning stroll or tweeting an infelicitous tweet, half a dozen officers will descend on you. In today's Britain, everything is policed except crime, even when that crime has been exposed to the world. Most people around the planet had never heard of the municipality of Rotherham until a few years ago. And for them, the word Rotherham designates not a place, but an event, like Lockerbie or Chernobyl. But in this case, the event went on an awfully long time, for a decade and a half. And the scandal is that the authorities, police, politicians, social workers, the entire do-gooder industry, did not a thing to stop it. In fact, they facilitated it. And as we have learned just this week from Rotherham, the event is still going on. By some strange subconscious dissemination, we have agreed to call them grooming gangs, which is a horrible euphemism. Indeed, a euphemism that looks at the crime from the perpetrator's point of view. A worldly man grooms a young girl, as if he's Professor Higgins getting Eliza Doolittle ready for the embassy ball. Grooming means gang rape. Grooming means dozens of predators performing absolutely filthy acts on you. Grooming means being dangled over a balcony and doused in petrol while men dance around you, taunting you with lit matches. What's with the euphemism, Britain? 5 years ago, I spent a few days in Rotherham talking to just a few of the thousands of young women who'd been through some or all of those grooming rituals, and I was struck by a couple of things. First, the weird lack of media interest in these women, even after what happened had all come out. I remember talking to Miss Sammy Woodhouse, a remarkably resilient survivor who's since written a book, and whom I met in the lobby of a rather cheerless hotel just past the Rotherham Hospital. Sammy had a litany of horror stories about not only the indifference, but the alleged hardcore collusion of the South Yorkshire Police, year in, year out. As for the political class, having ignored for years what was happening in Rotherham, they transitioned smoothly to ostentatious displays of empathy, if only for a moment. Sammy told me she'd been brought to Downing Street to meet David Cameron. I was keen to hear how that went, so I said, was he genuinely interested, or did he do that thing where I didn't get to complete the sentence before the girls exploded in laughter, all of them? He did that thing, said Sammy. You don't even have to say it. And we all laughed again. And so for a few minutes, David Cameron did that thing. He furrowed his brow and put on his concerned expression and looked as if he were listening, but the eyes were calculating how long he had to pretend to pay attention and put on the sympathetic expression before it was safe to say thanks awfully for coming to see me and moving on to the next, hopefully less depressing photo op. These latest girls, over 1,700 new cases compared to the 1,400 officially enumerated victims back when I was there 5 years ago. These latest girls won't even get a photo op with Boris. Too much of a downer, not his bag. The second memory that stayed with me in 2016 was from another of the girls, Katie, talking about her own child. She's blonde, blue-eyed, she's absolutely bloody stunning, Katie said to me. When I drop her off at friends, I literally do a circle of the block and 3 cars will come past me. She said there were a lot of brand new Audis with what Fleet Street calls Asian drivers, and they're circling too to see if there are young white girls. And sometimes she'd drop off her daughter and she'd see the Audi passing again, this time with the girl on the passenger seat. And afterwards I tried Katie's experiment in a neighbourhood she'd mentioned, and I didn't have to wait very long before I saw it too. The circling cars, and then the cars no longer circling because the girl is in the vehicle and they're driving away. No police anywhere, and when I eventually found a constable and mentioned it, he shrugged, because, hey, that's last year's story, and we've all moved on. Certainly David Cameron and Theresa May have. But the gang rapists and the petrol dousers and the balcony danglers haven't moved on, and it's business as usual in towns up and down the spine of England. This Remembrance Week, we have seen the best and worst of a great nation. We honour the glorious dead from a century of war who gave everything, and we learn yet again of police, politicians, bureaucrats willing to turn a blind eye to rape, assault, torture, because to speak up for these victims risks being tagged as racist and sent off for a month of sensitivity training. There isn't really a lot to be said for a society that simply looks the other way as its most vulnerable girls are abused and trashed. What's your view